The mainstream news cycle is currently obsessed with the smoke rising over Tehran and the high-stakes handshakes happening at the Doral Golf Resort in Miami. They are treating these as two separate stories, a localized war in the Middle East and a diplomatic summit in Florida. But if you're looking at it that way, you're missing the actual mechanism of power being deployed right now. What we are witnessing today, March 7th, 2026, is not just a military operation or a series of trade talks. It is the synchronized closing of a global vice. Right now, as you watch this, the United States is 8 days into Operation Epic Fury. The images coming out of the Persian Gulf are staggering: over 30 Iranian naval vessels on the ocean floor, the regime's nuclear infrastructure being systematically dismantled, and the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most vital energy artery, turned into a graveyard of hardware. The Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, just told the world that the goal isn't nation building this time. It is pure, unadulterated American dominance. But while the missiles are flying in the east, the real decisive blow is being struck in the west. At this very moment, President Trump is hosting a dozen Latin American leaders at the Shield of the Americas Summit. Look at who is there: Milei from Argentina, Bukele from El Salvador, Noboa from Ecuador. But more importantly, look at who isn't. Mexico, Brazil, and Colombia have been frozen out, threatened with astronomical tariffs and diplomatic isolation. This is the Donroe Doctrine in its final, aggressive form. It's a modern corollary to the 1823 Monroe Doctrine, but with a sharper edge. The message to the Western Hemisphere is simple: you're either an American partner or you are a Chinese liability. The administration isn't just talking, they are moving. In the last 48 hours, we've seen the Panamanian government, under intense pressure from Washington, seize two major ports at the ends of the canal that were operated by Hong Kong-based companies. We've seen travel bans slapped on Chilean officials over a fiber optic cable deal with Beijing. And most shockingly, just 2 months after the U.S. military operation that deposed Nicolas Maduro, we are seeing the total reintegration of Venezuela into the American energy orbit. Acting President Delcy Rodriguez is literally standing with U.S. officials today, promising to adapt legislation to bring American oil majors back in. This is the hidden mechanism. By crushing Iran, the U.S. is signaling that it can and will physically sever the energy lifelines of its competitors. By reclaiming the Americas, it is ensuring that the raw materials, the lithium, the copper, the oil, that fuel the next century remain under its thumb. The media wants you to focus on the chaos of the strikes or the optics of the summit. They want you to think this is about bringing democracy or fighting cartels. It's not. This is about the physical reality of supply chains. Beijing is watching their billion-dollar investments in the Peruvian port of Chancay and the Venezuelan oil fields turn into stranded assets overnight. They are watching the U.S. Navy prove that a trade agreement means nothing if you don't have the kinetic power to protect the route. But as the U.S. doubles down on this total physical control, they are creating a massive, invisible vulnerability. The more the U.S. uses its hammer to smash these choke points, the more it forces the rest of the world to find a way to break the hammer itself. To understand why the Shield of the Americas summit is happening at the exact same time as the bombardment of Tehran, you have to stop looking at maps and start looking at blueprints. We are currently witnessing the weaponization of global logistics. For the last 20 years, China's strategy was simple: buy the world's hardware. They built the ports, they laid the cables, and they financed the mines. They assumed that if they owned the physical infrastructure of global trade, they were untouchable. They were wrong. Look at the port of Chancay in Peru. Just a year ago, this was touted as the Shanghai of the West, a $3 billion crown jewel of the Belt and Road Initiative designed to bypass U.S. ports entirely. Today, it is a strategic ghost town. As part of the Doral agreements, the U.S. is leveraging security concerns to effectively quarantine the facility. We've seen the same play in Panama. On February 23rd, the Panamanian government officially seized the Balboa and Cristobal terminals from the Hong Kong-based C.K. Hutchison. They didn't just cancel a contract, they sent in the Maritime Authority to occupy the software suites and the cranes. The message to Beijing was loud and clear: you can pay for the concrete, but we own the ground it sits on. This is the strangulation phase. While the U.S. is reclaiming its backyard in the Americas, it is simultaneously cutting the fuel lines in the Middle East. Operation Epic Fury has effectively neutralized Iran's ability to protect or threaten the flow of oil. By sinking over 30 Iranian vessels and hitting their drone carriers, the U.S. and Israel have turned the Persian Gulf into a controlled environment. This isn't just about regional security, it's about a cold, mathematical reality for the Chinese economy. China imports roughly 70% of its oil, and a massive portion of that passes through the very waters the U.S. Navy is currently sanitizing with B-52s and carrier strike groups. If you are sitting in the Forbidden City right now, the view is terrifying. To your east, the U.S. is reinforcing the first island chain. To your west, your primary energy source is being systematically dismantled. And to your south, in the Americas, your ports are being seized, and your mineral contracts in Venezuela are being handed over to American companies by an interim government that was installed while you were still processing the fall of Maduro in January. The U.S. is proving that physical supply chains are only as strong as the military power that guarantees them. The Donroe Doctrine and Operation Epic Fury are two sides of the same coin, a demonstration that the era of globalization by contract is over. We have returned to the era of globalization by command. But there is a limit to this strategy. Beijing knows it cannot win a symmetrical fight. It cannot outgun the U.S. Navy in the Strait of Hormuz, and it cannot outbully Washington in the Caribbean. So, they are forced to look for a different kind of leverage. They are realizing that while the U.S. is focused on the physical choke points of the world, the straits, the canals, and the ports, they have left the back door to their own house wide open. And that back door is the global financial system. While the world watches the kinetic fireworks in Tehran and the diplomatic theater at Doral, a much quieter and more dangerous war is being fought on the global balance sheets. The Achilles heel of the American strategy isn't military, it's mathematical. To maintain this level of global dominance, projecting power in the Middle East through Operation Epic Fury while simultaneously enforcing a new hemispheric order in the Americas requires an astronomical amount of capital. And that capital is becoming more expensive by the second. Just yesterday, the Congressional Budget Office released its updated projections for 2026. The numbers are a wake-up call for anyone paying attention. We are looking at a federal deficit of nearly $2 trillion this year alone. But the real killer is the interest. Net interest costs on the U.S. debt have officially hit $1 trillion annually. Think about that. The United States is now spending more on interest payments to bondholders than it spends on its entire defense budget. Every missile fired over Iran and every security detail dispatched to Doral adds to a debt pile that is now over 100% of GDP. Beijing knows this. They have stopped trying to compete with the U.S. in terms of raw military hardware. Instead, they're applying pressure to the structural flaw in the American system, the dollar's role as the global anchor. Just today, March 7, 2026, the People's Bank of China confirmed it has extended its gold buying streak to 16 consecutive months. While the U.S. is busy seizing physical ports, China is quietly diversifying its reserves. They've slashed their holdings of U.S. Treasuries to the lowest level since 2001, effectively signaling that they are no longer willing to finance the very deficit that pays for the American carrier groups currently patrolling the Strait of Hormuz. This is the financial scissor move. On one side, the U.S. is being forced to spend more to secure the world's physical choke points. On the other side, the world's largest creditor is walking away from the table. When Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went on the air recently to complain about unruly gold trading in China, he wasn't just talking about market volatility. He was acknowledging that the U.S. is losing its grip on the financial narrative. Gold has surged back above the $5,000 mark because the market is starting to price in the end of the unipolar era. The irony is thick. By using extreme force to protect the dollar's physical territory, the oil routes, and the trade lanes, Washington is inadvertently proving why the world needs an alternative to the dollar. Every time the U.S. freezes a Russian asset or pressures a Panamanian bank to seize a Chinese port, it sends a clear message to every other nation. Your wealth is only your wealth as long as you agree with our foreign policy. So, while the US celebrates its tactical victories in the Gulf and the Caribbean, Beijing is playing a much longer game. They are waiting for the moment when the weight of the American debt becomes so heavy that the US can no longer afford to be the world's policeman. They are betting that eventually, the high cost of maintaining a global empire will cause the system to buckle from within, regardless of how many missiles we have in the silos. The mistake most people make is waiting for a single, cinematic moment where the world changes. They're looking for a formal treaty or a sudden market crash. But that's not how the unipolar era ends. It ends exactly like this, with a series of overwhelming tactical victories that create a strategic vacuum. Today, March 7th, 2026, the United States looks more powerful than it has in 30 years. We have essentially decapitated the Iranian leadership, neutralized their navy in under 100 hours, and forced the leaders of the Western Hemisphere to sit at a resort in Miami and sign away their infrastructure to American interests. But this is the paradox of control. By proving that the US can and will use its military and diplomatic hammer to smash any node in the global supply chain, Washington is making the case for decoupling stronger than Beijing ever could. When the world sees Panama seizing ports and the US Treasury allowing India to buy Russian oil only as a short-term favor to manage a crisis, they don't see stability. They see a system where their economic survival depends entirely on the temperament of a single administration in Washington. This realization is the true black swan of 2026. While the B-52s are returning to base and the handshakes at Doral are being finalized, the structural reality of the world is fragmenting. We are moving toward a two-hemisphere economy. In one, you have the shield of the Americas, a vertically integrated, dollar-backed fortress stretching from Alaska to Tierra del Fuego, secured by the US Navy. In the other, you have a desperate but methodical Eurasia, led by a China that has stopped trying to own the ports and started trying to own the value itself through gold, digital ledger settlements, and regional trade blocs that simply don't touch the dollar. The "Make Iran Great Again" rhetoric we're hearing today is the final layer of the illusion. It suggests that once the bad actors are removed, the old globalized system can be restored under American management. But you cannot unring the bell of 2026. The volatility of the last 8 days has taught every central bank and every sovereign wealth fund a lesson they will never forget. Physical assets are only yours if you can defend them, and digital assets are only yours if the host country lets you keep them. As the smoke clears over Tehran and the delegates leave Doral, the quiet work begins. It's the work of mid-level bureaucrats in Riyadh, New Delhi, and Brasilia quietly shifting their reserve ratios. It's the sound of gold bars being moved into new vaults in Hong Kong. It's the silent, steady erosion of the idea that there is only one way to run a global economy. The US has won the battle for the physical world. It owns the straits, it owns the canals, and it owns the ports. But in doing so, it has accelerated the birth of a world that no longer needs them. The irony of the Donroe Doctrine and Operation Epic Fury is that they may be remembered as the most successful military operations in American history and the final nail in the coffin of the American century. The world is splitting in two, and for the first time in 80 years, the most important moves aren't being made with missiles or summits. They're being made in the silence of the shift.